In this episode, we move from finding sensitive data to doing something meaningful with that knowledge, which is storing it safely so that accidental exposure or deliberate attack does not turn into real harm. Once you have identified where sensitive data lives, the next logical question is whether it is protected in a way that matches its risk. Storing data safely is not about hiding it in obscure folders or trusting that no one will look for it. It is about using strong technical protections that reduce the chance of misuse even if other defenses fail. Three major ideas shape this protection: encryption, key management, and strict access controls. When you understand how those ideas work together, you begin to see data protection not as a single feature, but as a layered design that assumes mistakes and still limits damage. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Encryption is the first concept most beginners hear about, but it is often misunderstood as magic. At its core, encryption is a mathematical process that transforms readable data into an unreadable form using a secret value known as a key. When done correctly, encryption ensures that even if someone gains access to the stored data, they cannot interpret it without the correct key. There are different forms of encryption, but the high-level distinction that matters for storage is encryption at rest and encryption in transit. Encryption at rest protects data while it is stored on disk, in databases, or in object storage, and encryption in transit protects data as it moves between systems. Safe storage depends on ensuring that data is encrypted not only while traveling, but also while sitting quietly in storage waiting to be accessed. Understanding encryption at rest requires thinking about what happens when storage systems are compromised or misconfigured. If a storage bucket is accidentally exposed or a disk is stolen, unencrypted data can be read immediately by whoever gains access. When encryption at rest is applied properly, the stored bits are meaningless without the corresponding key. This does not eliminate risk entirely, because attackers may try to obtain the keys, but it significantly raises the difficulty. For beginners, the important shift is realizing that encryption is not only about protecting against sophisticated hackers, it also protects against simple mistakes like misconfigured permissions or misplaced backups. By encrypting sensitive data at rest, you reduce the blast radius of inevitable human error. However, encryption alone is not enough, because the security of encrypted data depends entirely on how well you manage the keys. Key management is the discipline of generating, storing, rotating, and revoking encryption keys in a controlled way. If keys are stored in plain text next to the encrypted data, the encryption provides almost no real protection. Strong key management separates keys from the data they protect and restricts who or what can use those keys. It also includes policies for rotating keys regularly, so that if one key is exposed, it does not protect data forever. For beginners, it helps to think of keys as the master passes to a building. If you hand out unlimited copies and never change the locks, the building is not truly secure no matter how strong the doors are. Another important concept in safe storage is limiting who can access sensitive data in the first place. This is where strict access controls come in, and they are just as critical as encryption. Access controls define which users, services, or systems can read, write, or modify data, and under what conditions. Even perfectly encrypted data can be misused if too many identities have legitimate decryption rights. Safe storage means applying the principle of least privilege, which is the idea that every identity should have only the minimum access needed to perform its function. By limiting access narrowly, you reduce the number of pathways through which sensitive data can leak or be abused. Access controls are typically enforced through Identity and Access Management, IAM, which is the system that governs who is allowed to do what in an environment. IAM policies tie permissions to identities, such as users or services, and those permissions determine access to storage resources. A common beginner mistake is granting broad access for convenience, especially during development or troubleshooting. Over time, these broad permissions accumulate and create a large attack surface. Safe storage requires regularly reviewing IAM policies to ensure that access is still necessary and aligned with current roles. When permissions are tightly scoped and actively maintained, sensitive data has fewer doors leading to it. It is also important to consider how encryption and access controls interact rather than treating them as separate features. In a well-designed system, access controls determine who can request decryption, and key management systems enforce whether that request is allowed. This layered approach means that even if someone gains read access to encrypted storage, they still need authorization to use the key. Conversely, even if someone somehow obtains a key, they still need permission to access the underlying storage. By separating duties and controls, you create multiple checkpoints that must be bypassed for an attack to succeed. Beginners should internalize that layered defenses are stronger than single-point protections because real-world systems fail in unpredictable ways. Backups are another area where safe storage principles must be applied carefully. Sensitive data often exists in backups long after it has been deleted from primary systems. If backups are not encrypted and access controlled just as strictly as production data, they become an attractive target. It is common for backup systems to be granted broad permissions so they can function smoothly, but that convenience can create significant risk. Safe storage means ensuring that backup data is encrypted at rest, that backup keys are managed securely, and that access to backup systems is tightly restricted. Otherwise, you may secure the front door while leaving the archive room wide open. Developers and administrators must also be careful about temporary storage locations. Temporary files, caches, and export directories often contain sensitive data in plain form for short periods. Because these locations are considered transient, they are sometimes overlooked in encryption and access control strategies. Attackers, however, often look for precisely these temporary gaps. Safe storage means applying consistent encryption policies to all environments, including development and testing, and cleaning up temporary artifacts promptly. It also means ensuring that logs and debugging outputs do not inadvertently store decrypted sensitive data. Another misconception is that once encryption is enabled, the problem is solved permanently. In reality, encryption configurations can drift, keys can expire, and access policies can expand over time. Safe storage requires ongoing monitoring and review to confirm that encryption remains enabled and properly configured. It also requires tracking who has access to keys and storage resources, and verifying that those permissions still make sense. This continuous oversight is part of maintaining trust in the system, especially in environments where systems evolve quickly. Beginners should see safe storage as a living practice rather than a one-time configuration. Compliance and legal requirements often reinforce the need for encryption and strict access controls, but the deeper reason is risk reduction. Regulations may mandate encryption for certain types of data, but beyond compliance, encryption reduces the real-world impact of breaches. If an attacker steals encrypted data without the keys, the practical harm may be limited. If access controls prevent broad internal access, insider misuse becomes harder. Safe storage is about making the worst-case scenario less catastrophic. When you think in terms of impact reduction rather than box checking, the value of strong encryption and disciplined key management becomes clearer. There is also a cultural component to safe storage that beginners should recognize. Teams need to treat sensitive data as something valuable and potentially dangerous, not just as raw material for features. This mindset influences decisions about whether to store certain data at all, how long to keep it, and who should have access. Encryption and access controls are technical tools, but they reflect a broader commitment to stewardship. When organizations internalize that commitment, they design systems with protection in mind from the beginning rather than adding it as an afterthought. That proactive design significantly improves outcomes. Finally, safe storage is strongest when encryption, key management, and strict access controls are aligned around the same understanding of sensitivity. Encryption protects the data itself, key management protects the secrets that unlock it, and access controls limit who can reach both. If any one of these pillars is weak, the overall protection weakens. When all three are thoughtfully implemented and regularly reviewed, sensitive data becomes far more resilient against both mistakes and attacks. By approaching storage with this layered and disciplined mindset, You build a foundation that supports everything else in cloud security and prepares you for more advanced concepts that build on these same core principles.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.